Welcome to our short presentation on getting started with annotated bibliographies. One thing I should note at the outset is that this is sort of a general approach to annotated bibliographies, and so you may want to check with your instructor if there are any special requirements with regard to any project that you have to do using an annotated bibliography. So when we talk about annotated bibliographies, there's certain information that's essential or usually essential in each of these write-ups that you're going to do. And one of them is the author. So what is their authority? What is their background? What degrees do they have? And what experience do they have? Now, if somebody is, for instance, in the field of hospitality and has been, say, managing hotels for 25 years but doesn't have a degree, well, they would still have some authority from experience. Likewise, if somebody had a degree in hospitality and a focus in hotel management but didn't have experience, they would still have some authority because of their degree background. Ideally, if you can get somebody who has a little bit of both, or at least some of each of these, then you can kind of tie those together and they'll have a significant amount of authority. Now, the reason why this is important is because in this day and age, a lot of individuals put information on the internet and have no authority. They may not have credentials at all, or they may have credentials in an area totally unrelated to the one which they're speaking about. So that's something to consider when you're looking at your sources. So is the date of publication recent? This is another question to consider. If you're doing a history paper and some of the best sources, for instance, were written in the 1970s or 80s, those may still be valid and good. But if you're doing a science topic and trying to look at the current state of affairs in terms of research on a particular topic, then these aren't going to work so well. In fact, they may work against you. So this is something to talk about again as to whether or not the information is current and why that does or does not matter. Does the publisher give us more information that's useful? So is it a reputable publisher? I've published some books through the American Library Association, and the American Library Association is the largest organization of its kind for professional librarians worldwide. And so there's a lot of authority for things that come through the American Library Association. Now, again, we're in a day and age where people can self-publish, and there are other options, so you shouldn't rule out that an individual has published through their own self-publishing. Rather, if somebody publishes through a professional association, it does, however, give you some hint as to the validity. So what's the purpose of the book or the video or whatever the material is that you're looking at? What's the purpose and who is it intended for? So we look at this when we say, is something appropriate, especially at the college level, for you to include in your annotated bibliography? So if something's made for, Mrs. Jones's kindergarten class on global warming, then I don't think it's appropriate to use it as a source in a college paper or a college speech. So what kind of audience is intended when we think about information? And then relevance is probably the most difficult piece, because relevance is going to totally depend on your context. So if you know what your context is well, then you can determine if this material is appropriate. So if you took something that was extremely esoteric in terms of information, and your topic was a general topic and you were trying to promote a general understanding, well, you might be a little bit off there because it might not be relevant information. If, however, the information adds to, and this is really a key element, if it adds to the knowledge and what you can do in terms of a presentation or paper, then it does have a good amount of relevance. Scope of coverage is important. So this is something you're going to discuss when you're writing about the source in your annotated bibliography. You're going to talk about how much coverage a particular book or article has. So let's say it's a history book. You might talk about the coverage being from 1800 to 1860, or the coverage of global warming, where it looks more exclusively at the Arctic, for instance, and the effects. Or it could be the opposite. The scope could be very broad and covering the whole topic, and touching on all facets. So that's something to think about and write about when you're doing your annotated bibliography. Objectivity is a really critical point, and it's something that has come into the picture a lot more recently, as we have sort of a splintering of news sources, and a lot of them are politically motivated. So this is, of course, pure politics here. We've got two politicians on the screen, and so is the information that they're sharing backed up by facts? That's really key. And then, does there appear to be an agenda, and if so, what? So obviously politicians will in general have an agenda. So you got somebody here on the left, Bernie, and then on the right you got Rex Tillerson working for the Trump administration. So their perspective on issues like foreign policy are going to be totally different, and their agenda is going to be different based on those perspectives. So that's something you need to keep in mind when you're not only using that information, but also when you're talking about it. So you want to be explicit about the fact that you understand that this individual has sort of an axe to grind in a particular area. This one is another one to just think about. It may not always come into play when you're doing your annotated bibliography, but is something well written? Is it well organized, right? So especially if you're using blogs or something that's been self-published, is it well written and well organized? This is a little bit less of a case when you're dealing with professional publications, but it's something to consider. And that's not to say, too, that professional publications don't put books and articles out there that aren't really well done or easy to understand. So what's different across the sources? So this is another layer. As you write an annotated bibliography and you move from source to source, you might reflect on how one source overlaps the other in parts, but then in other parts perhaps adds a different level of understanding or covers different material. So these are things to think about when you're writing about your sources or presenting them in any way. And finally, this is a sample of what an MLA citation or a MLA cited annotated bibliography would look like. And essentially, you have all these elements in it. So we're going to look at the person's credentials. We're going to look at the person's writing skills and how it's organized, and what the potential use and focus would be for this particular article. So these are the kinds of things you're going to think about, and in this case book rather, but if you look at books and articles, you're going to do this kind of thing where you're going to write a little bit about each, showing that you have an understanding of the various elements that we just went over.